Is there an urgent need for us to help America in this time of crisis? I think most people would agree there is. And as a result, the House of Representatives more than 6 weeks ago passed legislation to continue to provide assistance to Americans who are in need. Certainly that would include those who are unemployed. We created an unemployment benefit, federal benefit of $600 a week over and above the state benefit, expanded eligibility and the time that the benefit would be awarded, and made it available across this country right at the moment when some 40 million Americans were announcing that they had lost their jobs, were unemployed. It was a helping hand that was long overdue and certainly made a difference in the lives of many families. I think it's responsible for the fact that we did see welcome news last week that some 2 million Americans have gone back to work. I hope that trend continues. But in the meantime, of the 40 million who are unemployed, this helping hand of $600 a week from the federal government is essential. It's not exactly a windfall when you calculate it. The federal benefit plus state benefit really comes up close to the average wage of most Americans. It is not a major benefit that they could live off of for any long period of time, that's for sure. But it gets them through the crisis, we hope, in paying their rent, their mortgage, utility bills, and providing food and clothing for their family. But here's the problem. If you want to know if there's some urgency involved in unemployment insurance, consider the fact that on July 31st, the program I've just described to you disappears. Do you think unemployment will disappear on July 31st? We should be so lucky, but we know better. It's going to take a while for us to get back on our feet as a nation, and we have to stand by those who are unemployed in the meantime till they can get back to work and provide for their families. But unfortunately, the program we created ends July 31st. Is there an urgent need to extend it in some form? I believe that's obvious to virtually everyone. I can't understand why Senator McConnell, the Republican leader in the Senate, doesn't feel this sense of urgency in his home state of Kentucky as I do in my home state of Illinois, right across the river. We have common areas. Downstate Illinois and Kentucky are somewhat similar in their economies, and I know there are people who need a helping hand. I hope Senator McConnell will consider giving them that helping hand, but not just in this area. There's also included in the bill that passed the House of Representatives, the HEROES Act, an extension of COBRA benefits. What is COBRA? Well, if you are working for a company that provides health insurance, you pay part of the premium, they pay the other part, you lose your job but want to continue that health insurance plan, under COBRA you can if you pay both sides, employer and employee, on the premium. Average cost, about $1,700 a month, a pretty hefty sum for anyone who's just lost their job. Under the bill that passed the House of Representatives, there would be 100% coverage of the employer's portion of the COBRA premium during the period of your unemployment. That is a helping hand which most workers desperately need. I'm sure they need them in the state of Kentucky just as we do in the state of Illinois and across the nation. There's a sense of urgency if you don't have health insurance, isn't there? We're more conscious than ever about the need for good health insurance. So I would hope that Senator McConnell would consider that when he decides whether or not there's an urgent need for us to pass the bill that was enacted by the House of Representatives. In addition, there's a major portion of the House bill that provides assistance to state and local governments. We desperately need it across the nation. Hardly any state, county, or major city, even cities of modest size, hasn't seen the cost of government go up as government revenues from sales tax, for example, have diminished, and the cost of government related to the COVID-19 crisis have increased. A helping hand to these state and local governments is consistent with what we did in the first bill, the CARES Act, and is desperately needed. What's the alternative? I know what it is, and most everyone does as well. There'll be dramatic layoffs of state and local employees if we don't provide a helping hand from the federal government. These employees include, of course, teachers, medical personnel, law enforcement, and the like. If we want to make certain that we maintain the basic protections of government at the state and local level, then Senator McConnell should consider supporting the bill that's already passed the House of Representatives. Now, there's one major stumbling block when it comes to this issue of Senator McConnell taking up any measure to help our economy from this point forward. It was 6 weeks ago in April when Senator McConnell announced that he was drawing a red line that he wouldn't budge from. And that red line said that we had to provide immunity from liability for businesses and others before he would even consider additional benefits for American businesses and families. We don't know exactly what the senator had in mind. He announced it on several occasions from the floor here that he wanted to put this immunity provision into any future package, but as of today, we still haven't seen it. We're still waiting. One of his colleagues, Senator Cornyn from Texas, and my colleague on the Senate Judiciary Committee, has given several speeches on the subject. There was one that he gave on May the 20th, which I would like to refer to because it's perhaps his longest statement and the longest Republican statement on just what they have in mind. Senator Cornyn said that there has been a wave of COVID-19 related lawsuits rolling in. He called it an avalanche of lawsuits. He went on to use other terms equally cataclysmic. He called it a litigation epidemic, a tidal wave of lawsuits, and he went on to talk about those as creating the need for us to provide some protection against lawsuits. Well, I decided to take a look at this avalanche, this tidal wave that we've heard about so much from Senator McConnell and Senator Cornyn. You see, there's a service which takes a look at every lawsuit filed in America to see what they're all about. And they have a category of lawsuits related to COVID-19. And they give weekly reports on how many lawsuits are filed. So let us take a look at the avalanche of lawsuits that have been filed as of yesterday. Remember, 2 million Americans have been diagnosed with the COVID-19 infection. 2 million. Out of 2 million Americans with COVID-19 infections and over 115,000 deaths as of yesterday, how many medical malpractice lawsuits do you think have been filed based on COVID-19? Against healthcare workers, doctors, nurses. How many across the whole United States of America? 5. 5. Some avalanche. How many lawsuits have been filed by those who say they've been forced to work in unsafe working conditions because of COVID-19? Well, in this tidal wave, there have been 49 of those lawsuits filed. 49 across the entire United States. But how many lawsuits have been filed by one insurance company against another insurance company as to liability under the insurance policy? 631. 516 lawsuits have been filed by prisoners because of what they have alleged to be unsafe living conditions related to COVID-19, and 194 lawsuits challenging government's stay-at-home orders across the board. This doesn't strike me as an avalanche or a tidal wave or some spate of frivolous lawsuits being filed. Part of the reason you learn in your first year of law school, in tort law classes, one of the first things you're told is before you can recover in a lawsuit, you have to prove causation. What was it that caused your injury? How is that defendant responsible for your injury? Well, it's a difficult thing to prove in many lawsuits, and very difficult when it comes to an invisible virus as to what circumstances or what individual would be responsible for the fact that you became infected and are filing this lawsuit. Causation is hard. But here's what it really gets down to. I believe, and most people do, that if a business or an entity is really making a reasonable, good faith effort to protect employees and customers, that should be a defense to any lawsuit. So what would that consist of? Well, we had a hearing of the Senate Judiciary Committee 3 weeks ago, and the star witness on the Republican side was a very impressive individual who represented the convenience stores of America. He was from the same state as Senator Cornyn, the state of Texas. His name was Mr. Smart. He came in and told the story about many facilities that he had which were providing goods and services to the people of Texas, and how he was making a good faith effort to protect those who worked for him and those who did business in his establishment. He talked about plastic shields. He talked about hand sanitizers. He talked about spacing and distancing. It was really clear from the start that this CEO of this major Texas corporation was doing his best to protect the people who came into his business and his workplace. And I thought it was a good statement when he said on page 7 of his testimony, and I refer you to it if you'd like to look at the Senate Judiciary Committee testimony, he said his biggest problem was he didn't know what standard that he had to live up to. What was the proper thing for him to do from a public health point of view? He didn't know which way to turn. Was it the Center for Disease Control? Was it Occupational Safety and Health Administration? Was it the state of Texas? Was it some federal agency? He was really begging us, give me a standard to live up to it. I will do my level best to live up to it. I don't think that's an unreasonable position. I salute him. And I'd like to be, if necessary, in court defending him, saying this is a man who is trying his best in the business environment to be a responsible citizen, both for his workers and for his customers. But he doesn't have a standard to operate by. Why don't we have this federal standard? Well, you point the finger of responsibility to the White House. President Trump and his administration have refused to come forward with enforceable and inspectable standards that we can use to take a look at those who are trying to protect others from public health exposures. And without that federal standard, companies like that one in Texas really don't know where to turn. If OSHA came up with a standard and said, this is what we expect in the workplace, and you lived up to that standard, I would say, as an attorney who spent a little time in the courtroom, you've got a pretty strong defense going for you. First, the issue of causation, and secondly, whether or not you have done what is reasonable on your part to protect people. So that's what it comes down to. Democrats and others don't argue that we should hold businesses to a standard of responsibility. We certainly don't encourage or defend frivolous lawsuits, but we don't want bad actors who are ignoring any standards or any responsibility to get away with murder. They should be held responsible and they should be reliable in terms of their own activity. That's what it comes down to. So Senator McConnell is holding back assistance for state and local governments, money for hospitals, money for the unemployed because of this so-called red line when it comes to immunity. Listen, it's human nature. If you say to businesses across the board, you're immune from lawsuits, I'm afraid some people will take advantage of that. They won't even try. And people will get sick as a result of it, or maybe worse. We don't want that to happen in this country. We want people to do the right thing, to protect themselves, their families, and to protect others, and in business to make sure they're protecting the public at large. If they live up to a certain standard, I think they have a good defense to any lawsuit. But the so-called avalanche and tidal wave of lawsuits, 5 medical malpractice lawsuits after 2 million Americans have been found infected by COVID-19, really tell the story. I would encourage the Republicans to finally produce and present to us the standard that they want to make part of the law of the land. Let's see what's in it. Let's talk about it. And if you're willing to establish reasonable standards based on public health to protect the public at large, I want to be at the table. We can find common ground. But if you're saying we want immunity for these businesses, we want to let them off the hook no matter what they do, even if they do nothing, I'm sorry. That's worth a fight. We've got to make sure that people across America have a reasonable expectation that when they enter a business or go to work, they're going to be in a safe environment, and that the people who employ them and the ones who want to do business with them have lived up to that responsibility. Madam President, I yield the floor.